in this conversation about AI's positive potential, it always cycles back to this focus on human connection and social connection. And what does it look like to start by building that foundation and then think about the ways that AI can amplify those connections or help us build things together. We need to become better at fostering those connections and being able to explore and play and lead with curiosity.
No, I think it's incredibly important. In fact, one of the major transformations I brought at Xerox PARC when I was directing it was kind of a switch toward looking at our game as social technical, not just technical.
Mm.
And if you play this situation as a social technical, you start to expand various dimensions of what makes it social or sociological and so on. And so suddenly you spend much more effort now reading books, magazines, journals on some of this softer science
Mhm.
in order to actually handle the really hard situations that come up in terms of going back to reading context
Yeah.
and reading it correctly, reading it fast, and knowing how to leverage the moment to advance whatever your experiment really is.
I think that's so interesting because I'll share a little bit about reveal some of my inherent pessimism, but it's interesting because I think especially having grown up in the valley post when all of this stuff was kind of beginning to explode, I almost have this connotation with technological innovation being almost incompatible with social impact, social connection, things like that, or just almost adversarial. And so I think that view that you're sharing and the fact that it informed like a tech giant like Xerox PARC is so interesting.
And so critical. I mean, and
Yeah.
uh, because especially given that we don't have time to be taught, now how do you amplify the learning
Mm.
with trust? And what builds trust? But the trust comes from you,
Yeah.
okay, and your ability to read the context. So
Yeah.
it's really interesting how this game has now switched to me to being inherently as much social as technical.
You know, one thing I'll say that I've actually heard from I was talking with another Gen Z leader and actually one thing that we'll do is we'll just kind of compare notes on what do you think are some of the big core kind of characteristics of our generation and then one big one that they were sharing and I would tend to agree is just this kind of deep lack of trust in institutions. And one of the things they pointed to as forces pushing us in that direction specifically was our experiences with COVID of, just our schools were telling us you'll come right back. There was so much kind of confusion we were feeling from some of the other institutional forces at play, like the government and corporations and stuff. And so just yeah, I wonder what it might look like to rebuild that trust or for us to look harder at why the trust was broken and what we then need to do in the aftermath of that.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting that it's very hard sometimes to start to trust institutions because of that variability.
Mm.
Um, in 20 years building a company, that tends to get put in cement pretty soon. But in an interesting way, learning how to play with nature. Nature is a hell of a lot easier to trust.
Mm.
Um, and you start to kind of understand what are the forces at work here. And you start to kind of even appreciate how trees are learning from each other. I mean, how the hell is that possible? And I don't want to go into why that is more or less right, but it's complicated, or actually it's not complicated, it's complex. But yes,
Hmm.
but these are, so we're having to expand what we're trying to understand. Um, so we now have new players um, that context incorporates that requires us to be able to master it, to understand it, to expand our tacit learnings into that space as well, and so on. So this is not a boring time.
Yeah, the one word I would definitely not use to describe the times we're living in, it would be boring. Yeah. So
No.
yeah, I mean, I'll also add, I have a specific affinity for nature and for trees in particular and the way that they communicate with each other and the world and us. And so it makes me, I was just beaming when you mentioned trees specifically. I come away from our conversations just with so much energy and hope and yeah, I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you for taking the time.